This is A to Z with Mark Zinno, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it starts now.
Good afternoon. Welcome to A to Z here on Locked On Sports Atlanta, where today I tell you it's time to face reality. Welcome in live on this Monday. Certainly appreciate you guys starting your Monday with us here on Locked On Sports Atlanta and A to Z. Hope you guys had a wonderful weekend. Weather was gorgeous here in the Atlanta suburbs. Hope you guys made the most of it. A big show for you guys this afternoon. We'll get back into the Falcons and the NFL draft, which is just 4 days away as well. People are pushing the panic button for the Atlanta Braves, and I can't understand why. We'll do all that coming up on the show today. But first, we start with the Atlanta Hawks, who find themselves in a 3-1 hole against the Miami Heat. And I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. This Heat team is good. They're really good, and they are markedly better than the Hawks. I didn't want to be all doom and gloom before the series started, but I kind of feel like I forecasted this going into the series, and it manifested itself last night in Game 4. You look at all the momentum that the Hawks had, right? They had a game winner from Trae in Game 3 to make it a 2-1 series. They get Clint Capella back. The Heat get a late scratch in Kyle Lowry, and the Hawks get out to a lead in the second quarter, an 8-point lead, and everything is going their way. And then something happened. Miami said, bleep this. That's exactly what happened. They said, bleep this, and we are better than this team. And now's when we're going to show it. The 26-4 run, and it was done by halftime. And I've said this repeatedly about the Miami defense throughout this series. They have an ability to turn it up whenever they want. Trae Young, who had 9 points, that's twice in this series, by the way, he has been held to less than 10 points, hasn't scored in double digits. Folks, everybody keeps saying Trae has to get going, Trae has to get going. Guys, this is not Trae's fault. It is not. I will defend him to the hill on this one. This is not his problem. He is being suffocated because he is the only legitimate scoring option on this team. And Miami has said, fine, we'll let anybody else attempt to beat us, but it's not going to be Trae Young. They suffocate him. They stay on top of him. They don't give him clean looks. Trae is relegated to 40-foot three-pointers near the logo because that's the most open he's going to be throughout the entire offensive set. Miami's defense is too good. You just have to acknowledge it. You're not as good as this team. You can't beat them. Your bugaboo is defense. You can't slow them down. It's a bad matchup all around for the Hawks. I don't know how else to be blunt about this without sounding like a negative Nelly or sounding like I'm taking a dump on the Hawks. I'm not taking a dump on the Hawks. This is a fun team, and it's an exciting team. It's a young team, but they're not as good as Miami. And the other thing that's been quite exposed in this series, unfortunately, is Nate McMillan, who is getting outcoached at every single turn of this series possible. And had it not been for Trae making that floater, if that floater hits the back of the rim and pops out, guess what? You've been swept. I mean, that's the margin right now that we're in from things looking completely awful. And you got beat by a 1 seed, you're an 8 seed. We really should have expected this kind of narrative. That's where we are. I mean, honestly, you have to look objectively about where we are with the Atlanta Hawks and where this team is. Without John Collins being 100% healthy, and I've said it before, I said it all last week, and I've said it again last night, and I'll say it again here one more time. Without John Collins being 100% healthy and being able to be a legitimate second scoring threat, and by a legitimate second scoring threat, I mean a guy who could score 20 a night, 19, 20 a night. That's where Collins is. Without that, without having to divert some defensive attention away from Trae Young to another legitimate scorer, guess what? It's somebody else go beat us. And when the Hawks don't get 4 or 5 other scorers in double figures the way they did in Game 3, they can't beat a good defensive team like Miami. They can just key on Trae. And Trae even said it after the game. He acknowledged that he hadn't seen double teams. He hadn't seen defense like that in quite some time because no one's guarded him that well. And it's not because Trae is unguardable per se, right? Like Trae is And that's not a knock on him. Like, that's not his game. Like, handles aren't his thing and working around guys aren't his thing. Trae picks his spots very well. He's a great shooter. He's a very streaky shooter. He obviously can hit threes at will from anywhere on the floor. But Trae's guardable. Trae doesn't like create a ton of his own shots all that often. At least not from what I see. I mean, Pete, you can choose to disagree with me on that. I'm trying to think of, ways that Trae creates his own shot on a routine basis where he works through traffic, dribble, drive. I mean, Trae looks for holes in the defense and exploits them. That's what he's good at. He's got great vision. And Miami limited his vision and has for 4 games. So this is all over but the crying at this point in time. I just don't see how the Hawks can get back into this thing. And again, I know I sound like, the negative guy, but I'm just facing reality here. And what I kind of felt was the situation before this series started. They're just not as good as they are at all. And that to me is a little problematic. And you have to start to ask the bigger question. And we talked a little bit about this with Chris Kirshner of The Athletic last week, because, while it's a fait accompli that Miami's going to win this thing, it's just a matter of when. You really start to ask the question. And I know it's early to start, but we're going to ask this question repeatedly throughout the entire Hawks season. You can do a lot of things. There's a lot of options on the table to make this Hawks team better. The one thing you can't do is run it back as is. And you know that. Because if you run it back as is, objectively, you're still the 6th best team in the conference. Maybe the 6th best team. If you get somebody like Miami or Boston or somebody to fall off. Because you're still behind Milwaukee. You're still behind Brooklyn with a healthy Kyrie and Kevin Durant and, the new lineup that they have. I think you're still behind those guys. You're still going to be behind Philadelphia. You're still behind Boston, Miami, and who else are we missing here? I'm missing one other team. Can't even remember. Doesn't matter. Objectively, you're the 6th best team on a good day. So it's unfortunate, but that's where this whole thing is. And Toronto's the other team I was missing, but you might be better than those guys. So regardless, you can't run it back the same way it was. Just can't. It's not feasible. So unfortunately, the Hawks, have to take a little bit of a dose here. And part of that change going forward, and I'm only asking the question. I'm not advocating anything. I'm only asking the question about Nate McMillan. Is he the right guy? I'm not going to try to answer it. I'm not going to make an opinion one way or another. I'm being perfectly clear in this. I'm not saying he is or he isn't. I'm asking you, the listener, the question. Is one of the things that has to change Nate McMillan? I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that he's been thoroughly outcoached, outschemed, and outsmarted by Eric Spoelstra in this series. That is obvious and that is evident. That happens. Doesn't mean he's a bad coach. Doesn't mean he should be fired. Doesn't mean you have to move on from it. Doesn't mean any of those things. In this series in particular, he's been outcoached by a large margin. And so as you progress into the offseason, and I know I have to wait until it's officially over, because it's kind of over, but it's not officially over yet. So let's wait till it's officially over before we actually really start to look for an answer to that question. But I'll put the thought in your mind now. Is Nate McMillan the right guy to get you over the top? It's a fair question. All right, we got a lot to do here on the show today. As I mentioned, lots of draft talk coming up this entire week as we get set for the Falcons. What are they going to do at 8? That's coming up next as well. Why are people panicking over the Atlanta Braves? All that and more coming up right here on A to Z, right here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On ATL, free on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Search Locked On Sports Atlanta.